Hi, today Joshua and I are at the Courtauld Gallery in London.
We're looking at some key works by very important late 19th century French painters.
This painting is called a Bar at the Folies-Bergere and it's by Edouard Manet, painted in 1882. And it's a fascinating painting. You keep coming back to it. It's full of visual tricks. It's a woman standing behind the bar with ostensibly a reflection behind her, but the closer we look, we soon realise that the reflection of her clientele, of the people behind, are all wrong. They're all out. Manet has played with them to give us this fascinating composition.
I mean, who wouldn't love this painting? It's so full of life, of detail, and the atmosphere of the Folies-Bergere, this musical theatre. You can see the audience behind and the chandeliers here with the glinting lights. But of course, this is a reflection in a mirror. And so the idea of the mirror is really a metaphor for this kind of interplay of social relationships, of the audience looking at the stage. It's full of detail for the eye to enjoy, but also to establish these relationships within the painting.
This post-impressionist painting by Manet is, as you say, full of joy, full of visual tricks, and it's an incredibly complex composition, full of triangles, the triangle at the bottom of her bodice, her corsage, the triangle between the reflection and her body, the triangle of labels on the bottles. It's really a kind of conundrum. It tempts you in. And of course, she's standing in our space. We are at the bar looking at her. She was called Susan. She worked at the Folies-Bergere. She was a model. And unlike lots of Impressionist paintings, this was made entirely in Manet's studio.
You're standing at the marble countertop, and so you have this direct encounter with the barmaid. She's placed in the center of the painting, which is unusual, directly looking at us. We're kind of implicated in this encounter. But then, as you were saying, on the right, there is this strange feature whereby her reflection is altered. Manet has shifted her to the right, where she's seen talking to a customer. Or potentially, this is another barmaid in a horseshoe-shaped feature.
It's interesting, isn't it, that Impressionism has given painters permission to mess with composition, and also just to kind of land in an everyday space and sort of record something that's happening, full of life. You know, this place was a fairly kind of boho, risque place to come. Lots of painters, artists came, hung out here, made drawings, and I think Manet, as you say, has really captured that kind of energy. But she, as you say, in the centre of the painting, is a kind of column of stillness. Everything is buzzing around her, and she looks really bored or distracted. Her head is somewhere else.
There's a sense of alienation from her work in her demeanour, her expression. And it's very modern in that sense, because Manet is introducing the psychology of a working class woman, which formerly was an unusual subject, to say the least, for a major artist. But I think, you know, at its heart, we are brought into contemporary Paris to meet a real, living, working woman. But there's a great deal of doubt in the painting, a psychological tension. We're looking now at Self-Portrait with Bandaged Ear by Vincent van Gogh, painted in 1889. And he painted this after he was discharged from hospital, where he was committed after damaging, mutilating his ear. And it's such a sort of honest, sort of painful portrait. He doesn't hide his ear, but rather he presents his ear to the viewer. It's almost like a sort of trophy or a sort of wound of which he's proud of. It's strange, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a real self-portrait, isn't it? It's very honest. It's showing his pain, his anguish, his difficulties, and as you say, painted, I think, a week after he was discharged from hospital, on the back of having this terrible fight, this argument with his colleague Paul Gauguin, who he'd invited down to make this studio in the south, in Arles. It was going to be wonderful, like an artist commune, and of course the two artists fell out, and as a result, Van Gogh paints this amazing image. We're very familiar with all those self-portraits, but this is quite a touching painting, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm always drawn to the coat. Yeah. I mean, it is January. He's very poor. He's not selling work, but he's buttoned himself up in this very heavy coat that almost becomes a sort of blanket around him, but also it sort of physically represents constriction. And so too the hat placed firmly on his head. Nevertheless, he looks directly at us. He's not going to flinch. He presents himself as the artist, as the visionary, with references to art behind him, with an easel and a Japanese print that he's hung up on the wall behind his head.
Yeah, he's flagging his references, he's flagging his modernity. I mean, a very modern Japanese print, a painting just started. So even this terrible episode is not going to stop him. And actually his life and his art are kind of as one. It's all part of his process, isn't it? But as you say, that fantastic heavy coat buttoned around his shoulders and the big fur hat, it's freezing and he's still working.
For me, it represents confinement and constriction, a sort of physical reflection of his state of mind. We understand that he's really quite tormented still. And the window here on the right has been kind of cropped, so we just see the edge of it. So he's in this space that feels quite claustrophobic.
Yeah, it does.
At the same time, there isn't a feeling of freedom here. Nevertheless, this must be one of the most extraordinary stairs in art history. This is the passion of an artist who will not be thrown off course. And you can understand the ferocity of his feelings in that row he had with Paul Gauguin.
And it feels very modern, doesn't it? It's, you know, painting has shifted. Painting is now absolutely happy to communicate pain, to communicate a personal journey, you know, personal experiences. He's not pretending, as you say. He's having a horrible time. Things are really difficult. He's cold, he's injured, he's lonely, and he's prepared to communicate that in a way that we absolutely connect to in the 21st century.
It's really a portrait of martyrdom.
Yes.
I think martyrdom to your vocation, to your artistic quest. And this bandage here, I mean, it really is, it's almost like a sort of sacred wound for him.
And quite a serious injury, we understand. I mean, lots been written about it, but he was, you know, in a bad way. But again, formally, I mean, the colours, absolutely brilliant. He's brave enough to put a really dark blue line around the jacket, kind of flattening it out, and those almost vertical, strong brush strokes. I mean, it could only be Van Gogh. They are unique to him. That way of working is unique to him.
And this brushwork is so honest, it's so physical and raw, and it brings you close to Van Gogh, even after the distance of 150 years.
This painting is called The Dream by Paul Gauguin, and it's made on his second visit when he settles in Tahiti, a French colony. And it's a beautiful and interesting painting viewed in the 21st century.
This is a mysterious painting, and he intended it to be mysterious. He said everything is a dream in this painting, all of the details. I mean, if we look at the two characters here, they appear to be engaged in a conversation. They're sitting physically close to each other, but they're not looking at each other. And we have a child in a crib here, watched by, is it a cat or a dog? And then this sort of fetish or idol figure that appears to be carved out of wood, peering at the child rather ominously from the foot of the crib.
It's a beautifully made painting, isn't it? And it does speak to, I guess, the artist's fantasy of other cultures. You know, he left his own culture, he went to live here. He was a colonial Frenchman. He was very, I think, naive or badly informed about, you know, the politics of the place. But that aside, it's really a radical painting on a formal level.
So to provide a little background, Paul Gauguin travels from France to French Polynesia in the early 1890s on this quest to find what he hoped would be, as it were, an uncorrupted society, that is, uncontaminated by Western beliefs. But of course, ironically, by this point, French missionaries had arrived, French colonial administrators had arrived. And much of what we see in his paintings is a projection of this fantasy, a romantic curiosity about a very different culture.
Yeah, I have a problem with it. I do, I have to say. I think it's a really beautiful painting, and I think it's very difficult to view it now, thinking about what we're thinking about, knowing what we know. Formally, it's absolutely exquisite. It's flat, it's frieze-like, it has this radical composition with the two kind of almost silhouetted figures in it, and the kind of, in a way that your eye is taken to the action of the room, actually the decoration of the room and the exterior. But it's a difficult painting for me to look at.
Why do you say that?
Because of the politics, because of what Gauguin did, because of what he represents. He left his family, he went and married an underage woman in this society. It's difficult.
Of course, it's problematic from the values of today, and we're entering into a discussion about the character of artists and how that may affect our understanding and appreciation of the art that they make. I mean, that's a very deep debate. But I acknowledge what you're saying, and in terms of our culture today, it is very problematic, and it would be fair to hold Gauguin to account for these privileges that he enjoyed as a white man in a colonial society. In terms of the painting, if we can return to that, we can see that there's a rider on a horse in the distance. And there's some ambivalence as to whether this is a painting itself on the wall or whether we have a view into the surrounding landscape. But of course that establishes this tropical feel. What is certainly curious is this frieze here, because this is an invention. This isn't anthropological in terms of witnessing indigenous Polynesian culture. This is a hybrid that he synthesized together from various photographs of explorers traveling all over Southeast Asia.
But it's interesting, isn't it, then, these paintings were viewed in France and an audience becomes misinformed. It's incredible how powerful these paintings are. But formally, I absolutely agree. This is an incredible painting. They are very beautiful, they're very different, they're a departure for French painting. And it's kind of mysterious, as you say. There are so many clues and there's no clear narrative. And as you say, he collages together information and images to make this fantastical painting. But the two women, one I think thoughtfully engaging with us and one not, one staring out of the right of the painting, make for a kind of odd and disturbing dynamic.
And the question inevitably arises is, who is Gauguin making this painting for? I mean, realistically, it's for a Western audience. But of course, he's in a position of power because he presents himself as the witness to this culture. But in fact, we know that, in fact, this is a painting full of inventions. Yes. And also, Gauguin never fully spoke the local language. He was inevitably always an outsider.
No, he's looking in, he's collecting, he's constructing, he's having a fantasy about it, and then kind of wrapping this up into these formally incredible paintings. But as you say, for a French audience who are sort of lapping it up and believing it, I suppose, to some extent. But we're looking at them out of time, aren't we?
And lastly, we should just say that it's an unresolved painting in terms of its narrative. that Gauguin's really enjoying this lack of resolution and that cultural distance, because he can set up all of these sort of enigmatic relationships and details that remain at a distance. Thank you for watching this film on the Art Channel. If you've enjoyed the film, please give it a thumbs up, and please do also subscribe to the channel.
Don't forget, we've got over 80 films on the Art Channel that you can dip into.